This is the second part of the second lesson, and it is called Limited Color, the Velazquez Palette. Now, it's a limited palette, a palette that consists of yellow ochre, burnt sienna, and black or possibly French ultramarine. When you mix the black or the French ultramarine with yellow ochre, you will get a green. When you mix the burnt sienna with the yellow ochre, you will get an orange. So really, a limited palette does have the option of pulling your secondary low-key range. Now, it's called a wash composition value. I'm actually not using much water. The paper I'm using is drawing paper. And I like this size. It's 24 by 30. And when I worked at a vertical tree, when I got to the top of the paper, I just didn't really try to end it there. I wanted to give the feeling of the tree being higher and bigger. So you could really expand the size of your format just by the way you draw. So let's make that a little clearer by extending this tree even a little further. And this is kind of fun because people really basically have a tendency to finish anything anyway. Our eyes do that just automatically. So I'm just going to take it up and move it like that. Now I've used, in this case, watercolor, a little bit of yellow ochre with a little bit of French ultramarine and, of course, a little black, just a little touch of that to create this greenish tone. Now there's a light green and a darker green. How do you get it darker? Well, the simple way is simply to use less water. It doesn't really take much water to create the illusion of the foliage. And we talked about the foliage being three-dimensional. So it's the direction that you paint, the direction that you draw. Now we're going to do a little bit more of that. On this side of the composition, I've decided to do a few more trees, more in a grove. And so I'm going to start just where I left off, drawing a similar tree, maybe grouped one here, possibly one just in behind it. It's kind of fun just to be super creative. Make your little grove. You may have seen one of these traveling, but your memory is amazing. You just get started and it will show you where to go. We have no idea how many images are collected in our little brains. The brain is an amazing thing. So here we have a collection of trees on this side, and I'm only using one pencil, just like this. This happens to be an 8B. It's a little heavier because I wanted you to see it more clearly, and I wanted to use it in creating the three-dimensional suggestion. And I'm going to turn this like that. Can you see, hopefully, how this turns? And it gives that idea of volume. This is another one of the elements of art, is volume. And I'm taking, shading darkly underneath like this, light, middle, and dark, and moving up towards the top, just like we did across the way. The only difference between this tree and that tree would be the placement. Now, this tree comes down this far, closer to what is called the baseline. This is the baseline. Here's the horizon line. And here would be a tree that is a bit larger, so it would come down a little further on the picture plane. It's really important that you keep everything in perspective, even the trees and the placement of the trees. And this might even go down a little bit further. Now, if we decide after evaluating that that won't work, just erase that line. This is still just a sketch. A sketch will become a painting with a little bit more development of texture, color, and 3-dimension, as we've mentioned already. And that comes by overlaying washes. And here we have a suggestion of a distant area. And way back here, we may have a series of trees that could be in the distance. So let's put them over here. It would be better in this area. So we have a group of trees that would be more back on the horizon line, and they will be quite small in comparison. Again, I'm going to overlap the mountains in the distance. And now we have a suggestion of little trees that will develop in a few minutes. All right. Here we have a third tree in this collection, in this little group over here, and shading again into the deeper areas for volume. And this is the light source coming actually down this way and this way. So the light is flowing in this direction. We have the possibility of a lighter color closer to the sun, like this. And it will contrast very nicely with the purple tone that will be created with a suggestion of the black again, and a little bit of the French ultramarine. When you combine it that way, it goes into a deeper, more of a purplish tone, and that's what we'll try later. But right now, on the top, just the yellow, and then some of the blue perhaps could be added down in this area right here. When you mix the blue and the yellow together, kind of in the middle value, the middle tone, the two come together and form the paler, lighter green. And I think that comes up pretty clearly. Again, the lighter yellow, and then the mixture of the two, the blue and the yellow, to create the green. The limited palette is very, very strong and brings a lot of contrast. It's a very effective method of drawing and painting. Remembering to keep it darker where there's less light and underneath. So I'll just finish this up quickly and move on. The middle tone, the yellow, and the blue to create the green. These colors work beautifully together. All right. There are many different shades of blue, and I've chosen French ultramarine for this study. The cerulean blue is much lighter. The Prussian blue is much greener. And also in watercolor, they have different, transparencies and opacity, and you have to be really careful which ones you use with each other. And I have to suggest here that yellow ochre is quite a heavy pigment, heavy-bodied clay pigment, and in watercolor, it will tend to get muddy. So you would not want to use yellow ochre with, say, a heavier color, even a manganese blue, or even cerulean is a heavy-bodied clay pigment. And the result will tend to be very muddy. So you want to be very careful with the combinations that you use in blues. The transparent blues are just wonderful. The transparent blues are Prussian, very lovely, clear Prussian blue is perhaps my favorite. Some of the phthalos. Now, phthalos are very popular, but they are also very strong. And for some reason, I have never used much phthalo, although some of the artists that I know do. I'm just not as attracted to the I don't know, it seems a little sharp, the phthalo. I prefer the Prussian. There's a softness to it. And then, interestingly enough, Payne's Gray is a blue-black, and I really like Payne's Gray. Now, when you're doing the trunks of the tree, remember that the side away from the sun will be darker, and I'm going to just leave it in the lead pencil this time for the sake of time. All right, but I will finish the drawing today. All right, just like that. Now remember, we talked about shadows, and oh, how we love shadows, because you can cast them across a very broad foreground, and you could fill in the area, and all of a sudden, it happens. There's a subject matter on what was just a very plain foreground, and the subject matter is just a simple shadow, but it becomes a subject, and it can take on all kinds of shapes. You can put it wherever you want it to be. And one of the things about composition is you want to consider the whole thing, and I notice there's quite a flow with the shadows this way, so I want to emphasize that by taking it all the way back, and even more distant trees that might be so far back on the horizon line, but they would pick up that line and that compositional pattern. And then I would just indicate a few little trunks that direction. All right. And there might be more trees up here on the hilltop, just like this. And they would have cast shadows, and they would follow the terrain and the lay of the land. And so when you're drawing, you consider the light source, the cast shadows, and even in this case, we have clouds, which I'll not do at this point. Perhaps I could do an indicator of that with the blue. I can do that right here. So the blue cloud coming from over there, you see, and I just saw it, can work this way, and then more intensity and a little bit larger. We have the clouds that are billowy and up in this area. And these billowy shapes, they tend to repeat the shapes of all the foliage. So we have this working for us. Repeat patterns, the circular repeat patterns. And again, it will repeat down here in the shadow that's cast. And we can add a little bit of blue onto this, and there's a roundness here. So you want to keep that feeling going all the way through. This is the way a composition is built. Sometimes it just builds itself, and you're busy just listening to what the painting is telling you it's doing. I love that. Over here, I'll fill in some of the darker areas away from the sunlight, and that line didn't look right to me, so I'm going to go ahead and erase it. If I had started with watercolor, I wouldn't be able to do that, but with pencil I can. And it just didn't seem to be right. As a matter of fact, this one's not right either. The artist has many options, and there are many ways to correct mistakes. Beginning with just the eraser, you can erase mistakes. The softer the pencil, the softer the eraser, and you have to be very careful with erasures on paper that is, of more quality than this. This is just a drawing paper. So it has a hard surface. The fine watercolor paper has tooth, which is this rough texture. And when you erase it, you destroy that. And ultimately, you destroy the ability of being able to render a beautiful clear wash. The surface of the paper is very important. And I usually use only d'Arches because it has a fine, lovely tooth. Not too regular, but just enough to give a lot of interest. Some of the other papers, the Strathmores, are student grade, and they're certainly very nice as well. And some beautiful things can be done on other quality paper. Sometimes when you've worked with painting for many years, you have favorite things. All right, so there we have the suggestion of colors over there, and I will fill in the trunks of the tree, make them a little stronger, okay, and cast their shadows as well. Consistency is very important. If you do something in one place, you have to do it in another place. We already cast a shadow here, but I could give it a little bit more oomph by filling it in darker towards the trunk of the tree. And you knew that. Shadows usually get lighter as it gets away from the object, and generally that's because light bends and refracts, and so there's more light coming to the outer portion of a shadow. Same thing here. Much darker in this area, and then as it gets out here, it lightens. All right, now our mountain has erosion, and that would be an opportunity for a darker area in this area, and then the lighter source on the top, the light having hit, and there may be light source back here behind the mountain, which would silhouette it, and it would cast the shadows. And the cast shadows with the yellow in between, you see, are very striking, and they make a wonderful pattern. These patterns are everywhere. Sometimes when you see a brilliant sunrise, the patterns are just striking, and the longer the shadow is, the lower the sun is in the sky. And it's beautiful, and then the higher it gets, it drops, and the shadow will be directly underneath. All right, we have a road that is possibly going to be here. I don't know, I'm not inclined to put it in at this point. There could be a little bit more shadow cast over here. And so we need to show the light of the sun coming in behind and silhouetting that mountain, the same as we did over here. All right, for today, I believe that is enough. One more thing. There should be the light source coming in between. There we go. This makes a complete story of the light filtering through and coming in between the shadows. So this will be striking as it flows this way through the painting. And I believe that this is enough for the foreground. It makes a very interesting painting with the foreground taking the lead in the composition. All right. Thank you very much, and we'll see you next time.